Our guest today is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Columbia College. He is a native Chicagoan, and he was raised in Hyde Park. Our guest today, there we go, Hyde Park. Our guest today is an outspoken advocate for the arts, a proponent of the need to expand the role of creative practice in society, and to rethink the way that artists are educated. He earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy, magna cum laude, from Yale University. Our guest today earned his Doctor of Musical Arts degree and an artist diploma from Johns Hopkins. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Kwang-Wu Kim. Doctor?
Thank you, Jay. Good afternoon to you all. I'd like to first thank the City Club of Chicago for this very kind invitation to be here today. I'm quite honored and thrilled to have this opportunity. I'd also like to thank you all for joining me today on this lovely, balmy November day. When I saw the snow this morning, I didn't know what that meant, so I'm choosing it to interpret it as a positive omen. I think I'm going to frame my comments today about Columbia College Chicago based on at least two of the larger conversations that are happening in our country about higher education in America. One of them is the very large conversation about affordability, and let me say a word about that. From my estimation, the conversation that is currently being had around the country about affordability is actually a very incomplete conversation because it is focused at this point almost primarily only on cost. Now, cost, of course, is very important, but I think if we just examine our own behaviors, we realize that the way we determine what is affordable is directly related to what we value. And for some reason, our sector of higher education is not engaging in the conversation about real and perceived value. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about what I think the value proposition at my institution is and will continue to be, hopefully. The second big conversation has to do with the changing demographics of the United States and the simple fact that the typical college student of the not too distant future is going to be a very different person than the typical college student of today. Again, I have some concern that our sector is not really addressing this challenge head on. So in the context of Columbia College Chicago, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in the areas defined by words like diversity and inclusion and community engagement. But first, let me start with some facts and figures. To me, these are always the least interesting, so I'd like to put them right at the beginning. We were founded in 1890, so we are on the brink of celebrating our 125th year. We are, as many of you know, a very major physical presence in the South Loop. Columbia College Chicago owns 21 properties in the South Loop and rents an additional 4, and that translates into about 1.5 million square feet of academic space and an additional 1 million square feet of residential space. Our campus has its northernmost boundary at the corner of Wabash and Congress, for those of you who don't know Columbia College Chicago, and we extend all the way south to 16th and State. And it's a very interesting campus because it's completely discontinuous. So you see these buildings that clearly, after a while, look like Columbia College buildings kind of popping out of that very interesting urban landscape. We are fully accredited as a liberal arts institution, but all of our majors are focused on creative disciplines. Just to give you a sense of what our students are studying, our largest major at Columbia is film. We call it Cinema, Art, and Science. Our second largest major is Art and Design, which is primarily at Columbia a focus on design, not fine art. And our third largest program is Business and Entrepreneurship. Many people are surprised to hear that we have a very large program in business at Columbia. In fact, it is the largest program focusing on the business and management side of the arts in the United States. We also have large, thriving programs in theater, music, dance, interactive media, fashion design, game design, journalism, creative writing, radio, television. If an area stretches out into something that might be described as creative practice, we're probably teaching it at Columbia College Chicago. We have currently about 9,500 students, mostly undergrads. About just under 500 of our student body are graduate students. And here's some more numbers. 58% of our students come from the state of Illinois, with the vast majority of that number being students from greater Chicagoland. This is a change that's happening to our student body. For the last 2 years in our incoming freshman class, we have had more than half the incoming freshmen from out of state. So there's a shift going on with our student body, even as I speak to you. All 50 states are represented now at Columbia College Chicago, as well as 61 countries. 9% of our undergraduates come to us from CPS. 18% of our student body are first-generation college goers from their families. 34% of our students would be categorized under the current categorizations of the federal government as minority, students of color. And we're very, very proud of that number because this is a huge part of our identity and our value system. And just to give you a sense also of the unusual richness of socioeconomic diversity at our school, 39% of our students are Pell Grant eligible. For those of you who don't know what that is, the Pell Grant is the federal subsidy, federal support for families below a certain income level, and it tends to be a marker for students who tend to not be at certain kinds of schools. We're very proud of that number. It's a very high number. It's a very unusual number for a school that's focused on creative disciplines, actually. What else can I tell you in terms of students? It's very rare to meet a Columbia College Chicago student who's not working. Very different from my undergrad experience. I think about this all the time. If someone stood up in front of my graduating class at Yale and said, everybody who's worked at least part-time as a student, stand up, nobody would have stood up because even those of us who did work would have been too embarrassed to admit it. It's a very, very different place. And in fact, many of our students actually work full-time, which is an astonishing challenge as far as I can understand it. One last group I just want to mention because I have a particular fondness and pride for them is our veterans population. We currently have 165 vets as part of our student body. They are very active. They are determined over time to take over Columbia College Chicago. And I honor them because I think they bring a very important set of life skills and experiences into our student body, much to our benefit. Okay, so that gives you some sense of numbers. Now I want to describe our students back to in a completely different way. So I'm going to ask you to join me in a little bit of a memory exercise. This may be painful for some of us, but I'd like us to all transport ourselves back into when we were in high school. All right? I think we all can remember at least that that's a time in life when it's really important to fit in. And it's not just important to fit in, it's important to fit into the right group. So, we're all high school students. Look around. Some of you probably remember that there were some students that just didn't want to fit in. A lot of them were probably involved, because we're talking about high school, maybe theater, maybe music. Music kids tend to be a little more straight and narrow. Art. I'm speaking from my own direct experience, I know. And, you know, those were the students that sometimes got labeled as weird, or, you know, strange. Now, let me continue on this because I was almost one of those students in high school. The reason I wasn't fully one of those weird kids is I was also one of those painfully stereotypical perfect Asian students. So my grade point average kept me out of being labeled as weird. But I still had one foot in that world. And what I would reflect back to about being in that cadre of young people is that's a really scary place to be. You know you have something to say, you know you have something you have to do, but you have no way of really knowing if anybody else actually cares about it. And the other thing is, you just know instinctively that to pursue that path means you're maybe ending up walking around in the world with a label on your head that's not so positive. Okay, now let's fast forward to Columbia College Chicago. A lot of our, not all, but a lot of our students, and I'm telling the story knowing that we have quite a few students here, so you'll all have to forgive me if you're thinking, that's not me. They come to Columbia College Chicago and suddenly they're not on the margin. They're not on the edge. They're it. This is a large community of people who were used to being marginalized, who suddenly realize an entire institution revolves around them. It's a very powerful energy that generates. In fact, again, coming from a very positive place in the heart, I like to sometimes refer to the community of Columbia College Chicago as the ultimate revenge of the fringe. It's a great, great place. So my entire career has been in some version of administration involving the arts and creative individuals. And I know from many, many years of direct experience that those of us involved in this work, either as practitioners or administrators or teachers, sometimes encounter a certain kind of skepticism in the world regarding value. You know, there's the idea, well, the arts are nice to haves. There's the idea, the fear that studying the arts is the ultimate impractical thing to do. I mean, I have to share with you, my undergraduate degree was in philosophy. All of my graduate degrees were in music. I was first generation, born to a Korean family. That was the ultimate 1-2 punch to my parents. Trust me, I know. But I want to tell you a story that will let you a little bit into my thinking about value. This is not a Columbia College Chicago story. This comes from my previous position when I was a dean at Arizona State University. I had a student, a young painter, who came up to me and said, Dean Kim, I'd really like to talk to you about the future. Great. She said, you know, my dream is to succeed in a career that does not currently exist. Now, for those of you who know me, that is pure Kwang-Wu Kim language. I was hooked, right? So I thought, okay, let's talk. And she said, well, my challenge is, you know, I'm a painter. I'm not really sure I'm ever going to get a job. I said, all right, we have to, so we sat down together. I said, let's try a thought experiment. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I just need for you to follow me. So the first question I asked this young woman was, when you're standing in front of a blank canvas, is that a frightening experience for you? She looked at me and she said, no, that's like the most exciting moment. I said, so would you agree with me then that you are very comfortable in a highly ambiguous situation? And she said, well, okay, I guess so. I never thought of it that way. I said, just stay with me a little bit. I said, now, you've started painting. Are you referring to a set of directions? And she just, you know, her eyes got really big. She said, what are you talking about? She said, of course not. I said, so let's just then agree that you are very much of a self-starter and you are capable of operating in isolation at a very abstract level of problem solving. By now she's just looking at me like, what language is he speaking to me? I said, okay, now imagine this. A gallery owner comes into your studio while you're working, you're about halfway done, takes a look at your canvas and says, you know, I'm really fascinated by this work. I have a really important opening 6 weeks from today, and I would love to be able to feature this work. So my question to the student is that painting going to be done? She said, of course it's going to be done. That's what we live for, that kind of opportunity. So I interrupt her. I said, so in other words, you are very good, you're confident about your ability to meet deadlines, which must also mean that you are very good at managing your time. And then the last question I asked her was, so a bunch of your colleagues walks into your studio, takes a look at your work, has all kinds of ideas, not all positive. Are you going to fall apart? She said, no. That's what artists do. That's the culture of the critique. We spend a lot of time doing this. We talk to each other about ideas. We critique one another's work. I said, so in other words, you are comfortable and expert at both giving and receiving feedback. I think you all see where I'm going with this. There are some situations in which it's good enough to just talk about art for art's sake. In some ways, I wish the world were always like that, but it's not. And it's very important that we recognize that when students are studying the arts and the creative disciplines, in addition to the specific skills they are learning, they are acquiring key life proficiencies. Now, here I'm at Columbia College Chicago. So how did I end up here? Well, I ended up here because of two things. The real punchline is I ended up here because of my meeting with students. But the first hook that Columbia College Chicago set with me was the core of our mission statement, which says, Columbia College Chicago prepares young people to author the culture of their time. I read that, I had to read it a couple times, so let me say it again. Prepares young people to author the culture of their time. I mean, you might have a hard time imagining because my hair is short, but it stood straight up when I read that. I had never read anything like that before. And here's what I thought. Oh, so Columbia is not an art school. Because an art school mission statement would be something like, Columbia College Chicago trains the next generation of ... performers, makers. And it's definitely not a pure liberal arts college. I mean, I knew that because of looking at the list of majors, but a pure liberal arts college would have said, Columbia College Chicago prepares young people to be effective citizens, for lifelong learning and meaningful contribution. So I was intrigued. So here I am, and here's what I would like to say to you is our value proposition. It is a focus on student success. Currently, it is a 6-part recipe, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. First, we take the best of that arts training model, which is based on the idea of skill development at a high, high level. So any student who graduates from Columbia College Chicago is going to be really good at something. They will have gone through a rigorous training, working with faculty members who themselves are directly involved in that professional area in the larger world. And they will be pushed to really get to levels of excellence they may not have thought themselves capable of. In addition, one piece that's, I think, important about what I'm telling you is that we are constantly evaluating whether the skills that our students learn mean anything, whether they are actually relevant not only to that profession as it stands today, but where we think that profession or that industry or that creative practice is likely to be in the future. Having said that, we know that's not enough because of the following pitfall. So you take a young person, you focus them, you get them to be really good at one thing so that they can be in that sector or in that job. But what happens down the line when that job no longer exists, when that skill set is no longer valid, when that sector goes away? So we get to the second part of our recipe. We also take the best of the liberal arts model at Columbia College Chicago. All of our students spend a lot of time in what we call the core curriculum. It's our version of the general education curriculum that you find at all liberal arts and all universities actually in this country, with a real focus on making sure that our students develop a certain set of key outcomes that will help them be successful. We're thinking about fluency in various modes of communication. Numeric fluency is not as important at Columbia as it might be at some other places, but the ability to reason with data is important. The ability to keep learning new things, obviously, because what we need our students to be able to do is to adjust to the following reality. Today's college graduate, if you look at current statistics, will experience something like 5 to 8 different careers in their lifetimes. That's not 5 to 8 jobs. That is 5 to 8 different careers. That is the current prevailing statistic. So the question for us, the challenge for us at Columbia is, what can we teach them as undergraduates that 30 years from now, as they're looking at career number 6, they still will derive value from? And we believe it's the ability to adapt, to adjust, to recognize and respond to opportunity. So that's that liberal arts piece. But you see, the two pieces together are much bigger than either by themselves, because the challenge with the liberal arts model, I speak from direct experiences, you have your mind open, but the world looks at you and says, but what do you know how to do? And the other challenge is, from the student's perspective, okay, I'm prepared for the future. How do I start now? So there's a third piece that's part of our recipe. We embrace at Columbia College Chicago the idea that our students need a suite of practical skills to navigate the real world. So in addition to the skills and the open mind, we are moving now in the direction where all of our students will be studying courses in business, in marketing, so that at least we know we've given them a piece of the toolkit to take their aspiration and their dreams and their imagination and translate them into something real. Because we understand at Columbia College Chicago that everything we do in the world at some level is a business. We're not uncomfortable with that idea because we want our students to be successful. Now, recipe ingredient number 4. All right, let's come back to the mission for a moment. Author the culture of their time. In other words, we expect that our students will be capable of creating things which currently do not exist. Ideas, perspectives, objects, environments. So then we ask ourselves, so what are the conditions within our institution that are necessary in order to maximize the likelihood that that's going to happen? Well, here's one thing we know for sure. If we had a highly homogeneous student body, if our students were basically mostly all alike, then what they would learn to do is to replicate what they currently know. And it would be reinforced by the fact that everybody else thinks the same way. Columbia College Chicago is deeply, deeply committed to the educational value of difference. That's what our commitment to diversity at a deep level is about. The idea that the more different perspectives we assemble, the more different ways of being, different ways of evaluating truth, different relationships to power and privilege and authority, different heritages, the more we bring that huge range of difference together and make that the setting for our students' exploration, the greater the likelihood that they will begin thinking about things that they never thought about before. What's even more exciting to me about Columbia is we're going to the next level, which is harder. I think we're pretty good at the community level, the curricular level. The question that we're wrestling with now is, in a school that is so committed to the idea of difference, how well are we doing when you unpack our curricula? So for example, what do we teach a student in X discipline about what is primary, about which tradition determines value? We have some work to do at that level. By the way, for those of you who are educators yourselves or artists or creative individuals, I'm sure most of you are, I would never want you to think that I'm proposing the idea that it's all just relative. That's not my point. My point is we have to invite students into the dialogue about what they believe the necessary important trajectories are so that they can craft their own work. Then, community engagement, which pushes us out into the world. So I have a little spiel that I'm going to share with you today about my idea about community engagement. But let me just say that as someone who has spent a career thinking about what it means to actually be engaged with community, I want you to know, even at the risk of offending some of you, which I would never do knowingly, I reject two expressions as not really having anything to do with community engagement. The word outreach and the expression service learning. And I want to explain why. Outreach is great. It's about, well, it is what it says. You reach out. Okay. And, in other words, you sort of, but it's usually predicated on the idea that I have something that I think you need. So I'm going to give it to you out of the goodness of my heart. Service learning is also about sort of a good deed idea, and then because it's usually wrapped in with credit, it's sort of do something good for someone else for credit. Yeah, we're a little stuck in higher ed when it comes to the idea of community. We have this tendency to think of ourselves within our walls as superior. And we're motivated by a certain kind of benevolence. We look out at the world at those people and recognize that they might benefit from what we have in abundance. So every once in a while we reach out, bestow our favor, and then come back home and pat ourselves on the back. That has nothing to do with community engagement. Community engagement is about establishing reciprocal partnerships with as many different partners as possible, hopefully many of them on the surface highly unlike. It's difficult, it's challenging, it's messy, and it's frightening. But the end goal is the idea that everyone who participates grows in unexpected ways. The reason why this is so important to me is twofold. When I first arrived in Chicago, one of the first people I met was Terry Mazzani at the Chicago Trust. And he said, so what's your dream for Columbia? And I said, well, I was brand new. You know how hard it is to talk about vision when you don't even know you're in an institution. I said, I want Columbia College Chicago to be known, among other things, as helping to animate the city of Chicago. Well, those words continue to be true. And I think this idea of Columbia's talent, this force of talent and creativity that we represent, being involved in the city is huge in that idea. But there's something else as well. We have an obligation to make sure that every one of our students has an opportunity to test themselves, to ask these questions. Who am I? Does what I think is important really matter to anyone? You don't do that in school. You only do that when you leave the safe boundaries and start really working with people with whom you may not share the same values. Now, I'm not suggesting that we want to put our students out in danger, but giving them that opportunity so that they could have those possible click moments where they think, oh, now I get what's important. So the last thing I would say to you is that the sixth ingredient in our formula for success for our students is Chicago itself. I want you to know that I'm very aware we could not do any of this. We could not succeed without the context of Chicago. We need the cultural vibrancy of this city. We need the diversity of our neighborhoods. We need the plethora of professional opportunities that Chicago provides. And I have to say that given who we are and who our students are and what we believe in, the very gritty urban landscape of the South Loop is the perfect setting for us. But I also want to be bold enough to say to you, I happen to believe, after being here now for not quite a year and a half, Chicago needs Columbia College Chicago as well. And let me tell you why I say that. This is a city on a very distinctive trajectory right now. We're talking a lot about the city achieving the next level of greatness. There's a lot of language about really establishing Chicago as a major international city, as a major destination city. And so I was thinking for today about, well, what does that mean in terms of what we do at Columbia College Chicago? Well, one thing I can tell you is that the greatest cities in the world are not defined only by their mainstream cultural life. They are in fact determined equally by all the interesting, unusual things that happen in the spaces in between. There's a kind of density of cultural experience that characterizes the world's greatest cities. That interesting in-between space is something our students who are involved in that kind of work specialize in. Now, that's not to say Columbia students don't achieve at the highest levels in the mainstream. If you could see the list of alums that I'm about to go see this afternoon in Los Angeles, you'd see how Columbia College Chicago kind of rules out there in Hollywood. The other thing that's important is Chicago right now is on a mission to establish itself as a major leader in digital innovation. So we are not a technical college, so our students can't necessarily contribute at that technical level, but all the interesting work that's happening in that intellectual and entrepreneurial space that's around innovation with digital technology requires individuals who are skilled in creative practice, whose bent, however, who are prepared also to succeed in the real world, but whose bent is to push boundaries, to ask new questions, and to get people to look at things from a different perspective. Now, I know that Columbia College Chicago is not the only institution that can say our students are good at that, but that's our bread and butter. That's what we are teaching our students to be able to do. So, in closing, I want you to know that a lot of what I told you today, I hope everything I said to you today is true. I don't speak lies, hopefully. Some of it is more currently true. Some of it will be true. So I hope you'll stay tuned. I have an appeal for everyone here. Two things I'd like to ask your help with. One, we are going to need a lot of help continuing this conversation about what are the specific proficiencies that industry and business and commerce and creative practice is looking for in young college graduates, so that we can think about how we continue to revise our curriculum. I also would invite all of you to help us think about who are the many, many, many community partners with whom we should be engaged. And finally, an open invitation. I hope you will all take some time at some point and come visit us in the South Loop. Most particularly, I hope you will have a chance to interact with our students. Again, today is a great starting point. I think you will find them incredibly open, engaging, bright, unafraid to be different, and extraordinarily generous of spirit. I know that every day when I look at our students and I think part of the future is in their hands, I feel encouraged. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Thank you for those inspiring remarks. We're going to take questions. So again, if you have a question that you would like to ask Dr. Kim, please fill out a form. Someone will be coming around. And also, I wanted to remind you of the raffle. We have two drawings today, courtesy of Let Us Entertain You and Bob Mariano of Mariano's. So if you have a chance to drop your business card in the dish, I think there's a dish involved, isn't there? Yeah. That would be great. Any questions?
Softballs will be appreciated.
Do you have any reaction to the Lucas Museum?
Okay, I'm going to leave now. Okay.
The question is whether I have any sort of statement, I guess, or response to the idea of the feelings about, that's better, thank you. The Lucas Museum, I think is an extraordinary opportunity for the city. I think one of the real big challenges right now with the Lucas Museum is the lack of a clearly understandable narrative about what it is. And so, you know, my feeling is once people understand what it is, they will begin to imagine themselves in the museum, and the whole thing will move in a very positive direction. I think hearing that it's a museum of sort of narrative art. I mean, I have a certain amount of background in this area. I don't really quite know what that means. So I think that's the next important thing. And it's difficult because we're all looking at a proposed model. There's some concern about the site, but we're not focused enough on what it is. So that would be my current observation.
All right. What is your name? Oh, okay, David Robinson. Okay. The Chicago Department of Aviation and the American Association of Airport Executives hosted the Sustainable Fashion Show at the 7th Airports Going Green conference with fashions and garments created by Columbia College students, School of Fashion, led by Professor Elizabeth, is it Sharrock? Your thoughts, please, about institutional resources like the Chicago Department of Aviation to mutual benefit.
I want us to partner with everyone. And the reason is, honestly, when you have the kind of diverse range of students that we do, we have to have almost an infinite variety of opportunities for them. So when I say community engagement, you know, I include civic engagement. You know, I'm not limiting it. For example, those words for some people seem to suggest community-based organizations only, but that's not what I have in mind. So first of all, thank you for the partnership. It sounds exciting. Sustainable fashion is a very interesting conversation, as is wearable technology, which is sort of a related conversation. But no, as much as we can. Let's do another one. Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Kim? Okay, did you fill out a form? Okay, we'll let you get by with this. Go ahead. Question is about the level of engagement Columbia has in Los Angeles.
You know, although we have multiple ways of defining our student success, one of the obvious success stories for Columbia is our penetration into the film industry, film and media industry in Los Angeles. We have about 4,000 alums currently in that region. Very active alumni association. And just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, so in the next 24 hours I'll be meeting, these are all alums, with the senior vice president and general manager of Fox Films, with the president of Warner Brothers Music, with the president of HBO Films. These are all people who graduated from Columbia, so it's at that level. We also have a really vibrant program, which we owe to someone indirectly who's here today, our semester in LA, which is it's a funny name because it's not a full semester, but it's an opportunity for our students to go out to Los Angeles to learn directly from people in industry, and then almost without exception, they end up in internships in those industries. So it's a perfect example of our ability to connect our students directly into industry. The one thing I want to say, however, is that, you know, we celebrate, and I could have done a very different approach and started making lists of Academy Award winners and Emmy winners, and I could have done that. But the reason I don't tend to present that way is because it proposes to you then that that's what we value the most. We are extraordinarily proud of all of our students who achieve that level, but we believe that success is also granted to everyone at every level. And we're in the business of guaranteeing that every student who graduates is successful. And part of being success is making a meaningful life and a sustainable life. So we've got the prize winners. We love them. We parade them every time we can. But we're also very concerned and aware of the narratives of the rest of our students, too.
Okay, we've got a couple more here. Fran Casey from DePaul University. How do you see the colleges and universities working together as a sector?
Well, one of my dreams is actually a much more a unified front, at least with the downtown colleges and universities. But when I say that, I'm talking about more at the level of resource sharing and looking to examine where we could eliminate redundancies and duplications. You know, one of the issues, I think, with the question of affordability of higher education in this country is if you really look at the landscape, basically most institutions are doing what everybody else does. And so it becomes like an arms race. You know, you start to try to differentiate yourselves, not based on what you do, but based on what you have. So you start trying to differentiate yourselves by the quality of your meal plan or the size of your gym, or the, which is all very costly. So I would love to see that happening. And, you know, luckily, Father Dennis, Chuck Middleton, we've started meeting and begun to explore that. In the meantime, however, there's another united front that's very important, and I'm sure this is why Fran asked this question, which is, you know, there is a movement afoot to help brand the city of Chicago, or sub-brand the city, along the, to get the country to understand that we are a major center for higher education. Most people outside of Chicago don't know that. You know, there are approximately 65,000 college-age students in the Loop and in the South Loop. That means that we have more college-age students in downtown Chicago than, for example, in, let's say, Boston. But when you say Boston, everybody thinks higher ed. Nobody thinks that about, even though we know about University of Chicago and Northwestern. So this idea of America's urban campus is the attempt now, the effort to help the city and the larger world understand the value of that sector to the city. How'd I do, Fran? Where is she?
Okay, we've got a couple more here. Ben Pfeiffer, quote, "We are not a technical college," end quote. Why not? Technical art is here and will only get bigger. What is Columbia doing in its classes for advancement in the IT industry?
Well, when I say we're not a technical college, I'm quite specifically referring to the fact that we don't have a Department of Engineering, we don't do computer science, we don't do, in other words, those fields. I actually think, for those of you who are interested in what I foresee for the future, that that space where the arts and the creative disciplines intersect with technology is potentially an area of great opportunity for Columbia, and it's an area that I have a great deal of personal interest in. We don't currently have really the technical resources in terms of faculty, facilities, or focus. So that would be a future conversation. Technology would have been, so if someone had said to me, please talk today about what you think the big conversation is about higher ed nationally, not so much about Columbia, then I would have bumped technology probably all the way to the top of my list to talk about. Because actually, one of the things which is changing the educational landscape more than anything else is, in fact, the influx of technology, the relationship of our students to mediated environments and digital technologies. The reason I'm not speaking about it yet at Columbia is that's a little bit ahead of us. I feel like I arrived at an institution with major aspirations in this area, but that's still a little bit behind the curve. So the next time I come back and speak to you, I'm going to talk about all of our successes in this area, because we cannot succeed without major, major advances in this area. We're just not quite there yet.
Okay, we have a couple more here. Eleanor Blick from Civic Federation, who is also a Columbia grad. On the subject of partnerships, how else would you like to see Columbia involved with the city? Are there relationships Columbia is looking for or currently lacking?
I personally, my perspective, you know, again, we have a lot of faculty and staff from Columbia here, and by the way, thank you for being here. And, you know, I hope anything I say that is not less than stellar doesn't come across as any kind of criticism. I personally think that we need to be a lot more connected than we are. There's a great deal of connection that happens at the level of the individual faculty member, which is extremely important. But we need to sort of establish a way of creating something that's perhaps a little bit more official. And by official, what I mean is something that's more sustained. So let me give one. I actually got myself in hot water the last time I used this, but I'm already in hot water, so it doesn't really matter. You know, we have a very large LGBTQ population at Columbia. We're proud of that population. The city of Chicago has the center on Halsted, which is the largest community center for that population in the Midwest. Although we do a lot of projects together, we don't have what I would describe as a sort of permanent, ongoing relationship. It's more project-based. I'd like us to bump that to that next level where it's a given that there will always be something going on, and I would like to see a lot more of that. So I think the sky's the limit right now. I'd also like to say that when it comes to community engagement, what I'm telling you today about my philosophy is nothing new to the faculty and students at our school. They're already doing a lot of this extraordinary work, so I would never want you to think that I'm coming in to sort of propose a new model. All I'm saying really is I want it to rise to the level of an institutional priority so that it moves from something that those who think it's interesting do to a part of who we are and therefore what we teach.
Okay, and I think this is the last question. Teddy Hill, who is Executive Vice President of the Student Government Association. Welcome to all of you. In the future, what direction will the college take to make sure students of all majors are knowledgeable on how to market themselves after graduation?
Yeah, Teddy, I don't know how long it's going to take for us to get there, but this idea of learning to market yourself, learning to market your creative capital, learning to market your skill set and your creative work is something that I want to make sure that all students, and I'm a little bit old-fashioned, I actually like requirements because I actually think requirements reflect what an institution believes in the most. So I want to make something like that a requirement for all students. There will be students who don't understand why. It doesn't matter because that ability to get out there and look, it's about promoting yourself, is a fundamental skill. So the answer to your question is currently some students take courses in that area. What we're working on now is a way to move those courses into the college's requirements so that we can honestly say to the world, this is something all of our students study and develop. Oh, by the way, let me add to that too. This is not just an academic exercise. So, you know, we are working very hard to make sure that all of our students are actively engaged with industry, with the world of professional practice. And my goal is to make that just a regular feature from first semester freshman year for all Columbia College Chicago students. Because if you think about it, at the age of 17, someone might say, I want to be a film producer. They might have no idea what that means. They might spend some time with a film producer and realize, this is the last thing I want to do. I want our students to have that opportunity to learn experientially as well.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Thank you. Round of applause.